Hello and welcome to this Foster Care Institute online training webinar, Proper Documentation in the Workforce. I am your host, Dr. John DeGarmo, founder and director of the Foster Care Institute. I am a consultant to foster care agencies and child welfare programs across the nation, a best-selling author of several foster parent books, and perhaps most importantly, I have been a foster parent myself to over 60 plus children who have come through my home and been a part of my family over the years. And my wife and I have had the blessing of adopting 3 children from the foster care system as well. To be sure, it's my greatest joy to be a parent to so many children. Our goal during this Foster Care Institute training webinar is to help you better understand how to write proper documentation while in the workforce. We're going to increase your awareness of the importance of proper documentation when it comes to you working and living with youth in crisis. And we're going to help you gain understanding of some of the do's and some of the don'ts when writing proper documentation while in the workforce. Now, as I've said so many times here at the Foster Care Institute, and as you well know, it is not easy when you work with children in crisis. You are bound to have challenges from time to time. You might even suggest you could have challenges from day to day because you're working with youth who might have issues of trust, youth who might have issues of attachment. Perhaps there might be some youth that you work with who have anger management issues. Perhaps they have reactive attachment disorder. Maybe they have issues of lying or telling the truth. Perhaps there might be issues of sleep anxieties or eating disorders. Maybe they have issues of ADHD or autism. Maybe from time to time they might have a meltdown or they might be yelling or screaming at you. To be sure, these are children in trauma, and these are youth who are just trying to struggle to hang on. These are youth who are simply trying to do the best they can in a system they never asked to be placed in. Now, I have a dear friend who's a real estate agent, and I've heard this from him time and time again. The 3 most important words, he says, for real estate agents are, perhaps you already know, location, location, location. Well, when it comes to working with youth in crisis, perhaps the 3 most important words you might have are documentation, documentation, and that's right, documentation. Bertrand Meyer once said this, quote, incorrect documentation is often worse than no documentation, end quote. Let's say it again. Incorrect documentation is often worse than no documentation. So that means you must be documenting everything. We thank Bertrand Meyer for this quote. So let's look at why documentation is important. Why must you properly document everything that goes on while you're working with youth in the foster care system, while you're working with youth in crisis, while you're working with youth in the residential facility or the residential home? Why is it important? Well, to begin with, accurate and proper documentation, and we're going to use that word a lot, proper documentation, the right way to document. There is a right way and there's a wrong way. Accurate and proper documentation is just not a chore. It's just not a duty. In fact, it's a key piece. It's a critical piece. You might even say it's a cornerstone of professional practice. Professional practice that helps you to ensure that the youth that you're working with, the youth in the home, the youth in care, well, you help them receive the very best care, the very best support services possible that they need. And you can do this through proper documentation. Again, it's not a chore. Shouldn't be seen as a chore. Shouldn't be seen as a duty. It should be seen as a way to help youth get the help, get the best care, get the best support services that are possible for them. When it comes to legal protection, proper documentation is so important. Because when you properly document, you have a record to show. Now, in case there's any sort of legal scrutiny, perhaps the state is coming along to review or inspect the home, see how the records and see how the home has been working along and see how the youth have been, see how the staff have worked with youth, etc. In case the state should come along or in case there's any sort of legal scrutiny whatsoever, well-maintained records and proper documentation help to showcase that there's been an adherence to professional standards, standards perhaps held by the state, as well as to justify any sort of clinical decisions. So again, when you properly document an incident, it helps to show, in case of legal scrutiny, that there has been an adherence to the professional standards that are expected, and as well as to justify any sort of decision making when it comes to clinical decisions. Along with that, proper documentation helps to ensure that there is transparency and accountability that aligns with the ethical principles of social work profession. And that's the sort of profession you are in, social work profession. So it helps with ethical compliance. Finally, proper documentation or comprehensive documentation helps to identify and mitigate any sort of potential risks that are involved when you are trying to protect, when you are working with youth in crisis. And this helps to protect both the practitioners, you, the staff, as well as the clients, the youth that you're working with. And we thank the Mentalic.com for these 3 examples of documentation. Now let's go further to the importance of documentation. Proper documentation also helps to enhance or to give the care, the youth in crisis, the care they need, as well as to enhance it, to improve it in the home, the facility, and in the following ways. For example, during emergencies, if there's some sort of emergency, having access to important and complete information through the documentation on the teenager in question can be critical. Can be critical if an informed decision needs to be made very, very quickly. Detailed documentation and records can also help to ensure that you, the staff, can quickly and completely understand the youth's background and the history and the youth's needs. If there's a youth placed in the facility and there is a record of documentation, that helps you better understand the youth challenges that he's experiencing and the support services the youth might need during a very critical time. Along with this, documentation and records can help the staff to track the progress of the youth over a period of time, to better identify patterns and potential concerns, and finally to adjust any needed accommodations that the youth might need. In addition, proper and accurate documentation can help in developing and improve treatment plans that the youth might need as well. For you see, when you have proper documentation and you're looking at how can we help to improve the treatment plans for the youth, the treatment plans that he might need, he might be required. When you have that proper documentation, well, that can show the history of that child history of that team, and it can showcase what needs to be improved, and that can help you with those treatment plans. Proper and accurate documentation can also help or aid by ensuring that all staff, every single staff member in the home, can ensure that all staff are on the, quote, same page, quote, if you will, when it comes to the teenager. Because there might be some sort of disagreement, there might be some some concerns that are not shared by others. Some might have concerns, some might not. Some might see problems, some might not. When you have proper and accurate documentation, it helps to make sure that everybody is on the same page. Everybody understands the challenges in regards to the youth. Finally, proper and accurate documentation helps to reduce any sort of miscommunication that might be with the staff, that might exist between staff members or others. Again, proper documentation helps to reduce any sort of miscommunication. So, we've looked at the importance of proper documentation. What does it look like? What does documentation look like? Well, before we get into the do's and the don'ts of proper documentation, there are some other things that you should be documenting as well. For example, you should be documenting everything when it comes to the teen. When he started eating healthy at some point, because we know that a healthy diet corresponds with success in a lot of areas. You should be documenting when he starts behaving in a more positive fashion, when he starts acting more kindly towards others, when his negative behavior has decreased, how he might have handled a difficult situation in a positive way. So these are some of the things that you should be documenting on a regular basis. I love this quote. Document it or it didn't happen. There's strong truth to that. Let me say that again, and please reflect upon that. Document it or it didn't happen. If you don't document it, then there's no evidence, there's no proof, if you will, that an incident might have occurred, that there might have been concern, that a problem existed, whatever it might be. So let's go back to how to document. And we're going to look at, first of all, what not to document. When you are writing proper documentation, it's important that you do not share your opinions. For you see, when you're documenting something, your opinion does not matter in this case. You should be documenting just the facts, so to speak. If you have an opinion that something was handled poorly, you leave that out of the documentation. If you have an opinion that the teenager was acting in a rude fashion, you don't give your opinion. You do not share your emotions in proper documentation. You do not share any sort of personal biases you might have towards the youth or even towards another staff member. If you feel a staff member handled something poorly, you do not include that in the documentation. If you do not like the way a staff treats a youth in the facility, you do not include that, your personal biases, if you will, in the proper documentation. You also do not include any sort of personal details, any details personally about yourself. When writing proper documentation, you do not overuse abbreviations. In fact, try to avoid abbreviations in documentation. Avoid words that are commonly used or even overused, such as the word disrespect. Again, this is a word that is often overused, and this could be considered an opinion of yours. So try to avoid the word disrespect. When writing proper documentation, you don't want to discount any information. You do not want to share incomplete information or missing details. Just the opposite. You should give as much information and as much detail as possible. When writing proper documentation, do not use absolutes. For example, absolute expressions will absolutely get you in trouble. Do not use the word absolutely. He was absolutely rude to me. He absolutely would not follow the requirements or the rules of the home. Avoid the word absolute or absolutely. Now, specific dates are always ideal, but if they're not available, then use words like periodically or frequently. For example, you want to try to use specific dates. On 10/13/2024, the youth did, etc. Or on the following dates, 10/13, 10/14, 10/17, 10/22 in the year 2024. Now, if you're unsure of the dates and it did happen on a regular basis, then you might use the word frequently. He frequently refuses to follow the rules. He frequently does not turn his light off at the requested time. He frequently will argue with an adult when asked to do, etc. Again, try to use specific dates because they're ideal. But if you're unable to do so, then use words like periodically or frequently. You should also not include comments that other staff members might have said about an event or participant if the person was actually not there. For example, if you are sharing what happened with another staff member and the staff member gave his own opinion about it, you do not include that in the written documentation. The only events and the only words that you include in proper documentation are by people that were actually there at the event, at the incident. Do not use words like always or never. Most employee conduct is not absolute. It doesn't always happen. It never happens. The use of these terms can, in fact, affect your credibility. And let me say that again. Do not use words like always or never. When you use those words, you actually lose some credibility. When it comes to dates, do not backdate documents. Do not backdate a document. This is actually, in some cases, illegal to do so and can place you at risk. When it comes to writing proper documentation, do not embellish or exaggerate or even sugarcoat or try to make something sound better. When you do so, when you inflate something like this, when you embellish or sugarcoat, when you inflate something like this, it makes it difficult to support any sort of disciplinary action. Telling the good and the bad allows employees, such as yourself, to accurately gauge performance in the conduct. When it comes to writing proper documentation, talk to your supervisor to see if there is a documentation form or even a documentation book that the facility uses on a regular basis. Many facilities have a documentation form that everybody uses. Make sure you follow the documentation process that is expected of you and all staff members. And when you're writing proper documentation, make sure you focus on the workplace policies. When it comes to writing proper documentation, it's very important that you identify and you list anyone and everyone. Let me say that again. Anyone and everyone that was involved or in some way participated in the event or the incident, or anyone that might have been a witness of any kind. Perhaps a youth was arguing with a caseworker, and there was another caseworker in the room who witnessed it, who saw it happen. They did not make any comments, but they did witness it. They did not intervene in any way whatsoever, but they were in the room and they saw what happened. You need to list that. You need to document everybody who was involved in any way in the event. In addition, you need to document what transpired. What happened? Remember, you want to give as much detail and as much information in an unbiased fashion without any sort of opinion. You're documenting what happened, the specific intervention that occurred, and any sort of accommodations that were made. Any sort of accommodations that were made, as well as any additional help that may have also been provided by yourself or by other staff members, caseworkers, therapists, counselors, supervisors, etc. We talked a little earlier about the dates. It is important that you document and record the following: the date the event happened, the time as close to possible. For example, on Friday, January 3rd, 2024, approximately 1:30 p.m. in the bedroom of the youth. Again, you want to give the exact location: the bedroom, the office, the kitchen, the courtyard, etc. And you also want to give the duration of the event, how long it happened for, from 1:30 p.m. to 2:15 p.m., from 10 p.m. to 10:20 p.m. The date, the time, the location, and how long the incident happened. This is very important. Now, make sure that you document the order of events, the sequence of events in a chronological fashion. On 10/13/24, this happened, followed by this, and finally this happened. You want to give it in chronological order. You also want to document the mode or the medium of the event. The event that you are documenting, was it face-to-face? Was it between two people? Did it happen in person in front of you, or was it via a phone? Was the incident via a text? Was it through an email? Was it through a video? You need to document the mode or the medium of the event. When it comes to documenting style, you try to use words and languages that are clinical. Do not use slang. Do not use abbreviations. Try to use words that are clinical so people from a number of different fields of work can understand it. So the caseworker can understand it, perhaps a therapist or counselor, other staff members, a supervisor, a doctor, somebody from the state, a legislator, a parental figure. Try to use words that are clinical so everybody can have a better, clear understanding. If you are using technical terms, you might want to give a brief explanation afterwards what the technical term is to better clarify your meaning and your intent. When writing proper documentation, try to be as clear and as concise as you can. Try to be as clear and concise as you can when you're writing and documenting. We said this earlier, avoid slang, avoid abbreviations, avoid jargon, avoid acronyms. You also want to write in a fashion that is not too wordy, or you're repeating yourself over and over again. Do not be repetitious. Instead, write in simple sentences. Do not write in long, drawn-out sentences. Do not write in long, drawn-out paragraphs. Be simple, be clear, be concise. Do not be too wordy, and avoid abbreviations. When it comes to writing proper documentation, it is important that you write in an objectional manner. Again, you do not give your opinions. You do not give personal details. You're writing in an objectional fashion. Just the facts, so to speak, just the facts. And you focus upon what you observe, the behaviors that you observe, as well as only factual information. And you use quotation marks when sharing what the youth said, or what another staff member said, or what a supervisor said, or what a therapist or counselor said, when you're using their direct words. Try not to paraphrase what someone said. Try not to make up what somebody else said. Try to use their direct words and use it in quotations. Again, do not paraphrase what someone said because you're not giving the facts. You are instead embellishing it, and it could be seen as an exaggeration or false information, and you lose credibility that way. Indeed, do not exaggerate. Do not exaggerate any sort of details, anything that might have been said, or those who might not have been involved. Do not include people who were not there. If another staff member heard about an incident and told you later on what their opinion was, it should not be included because that person was not involved in the situation. If you feel that you need to talk about it with somebody and that person told you what their opinion was, or told you what you should have done, or told you how you should have been punished, etc., do not include it because they were not involved. Again, only include the individuals that were actually involved or who witnessed it. And do not exaggerate any sort of information, any sort of details. If you want to include your opinions and you want to include how you felt about the incident, it's perfectly fine. But you should do that in your own personal journal, your own diary, if you will. You do that separately. And that can be very, very healthy. In fact, writing in a journal and writing in a diary can help prevent secondary traumatic stress or compassion fatigue. It also helps to prevent burnout because it's allowing you to share and express your feelings instead of bottling up. But again, this should not be included in any sort of proper documentation at work. Let me state this once more, please. It's perfectly fine to include your details or how you felt about something, but you should do it in a separate fashion that is not work related. You do that on your own time in a personal journal or personal diary. When writing proper documentation, it's important that you include any sort of relevant backup information. You reference past relevant events that might be important to what may have happened. You document specific workplace policies, procedures, and rules that are involved in the situation. For example, if a youth refused to go to bed at a specific time, a time that is allotted for that individual, and he simply refused to do so, then you should document that, and you document what the rule for that certain individual is. For example, the home has a rule requirement that lights are out for all students on school evenings at 10 p.m. On Friday, January 3rd, and on Saturday, and the following Monday, January 6th, the individual refused to turn the lights off, per the home policy. So again, any relevant backup information and past events that are specific to the workplace policies, the workplace rules and regulations and procedures that are specifically involved in the incident, the situation. Now, it's so important that you are completely truthful when writing proper documentation. You must be truthful and accurate, as well as professional. When writing proper documentation, it is important that you are professional for a number of reasons. To protect yourself, to protect your loss of credibility, to make sure that everybody's on the same page, for legal requirements, for ethical requirements. Again, be truthful, be professional every time you are documenting any sort of event or behavior or something that needed to be documented. Of course, before you submit the documentation, it's important that you proofread. You proofread for any sort of errors. You proofread to make sure that the information is clear and concise and understandable for clarity's sake. You proofread in case you need to remove any information that should not be in there, any sort of unnecessary information. Perhaps you might have included someone else's words who was not there. Perhaps you included your own personal biases towards another staff member. Perhaps you included your own opinion about the youth. When you proofread it, you need to remove all of that. Remember, you are accountable. You are accountable for what you document. You can be held accountable for your documentation. So make sure it's accurate. Make sure it's correct. Make sure it's non-judgmental. No opinions, no biases, not including anybody who was not there or involved in the incident. And you make sure that it's just the facts. When you've proofread it, when you've ensured that it is truthful, it's professional, it's accurate, then you sign and you date it. If the document is worth preparing, if it's worth your time writing and submitting, it should be legible. And the author of the document and date should be noted. So again, you sign it and you date it. You sign your name, and underneath your name, you put the date that you wrote it. Now, when should you write documentation? All the time. Documentation should be an ongoing practice when you're working with youth in crisis. Because again, not only are you documenting a negative incident, you should also be documenting, and we said this at the beginning, you should also be documenting any changes in behavior, when a change might have occurred, how long the behavior may have lasted, how you addressed the changes, how the youth reacted to any rules or any consequences in place. You should also be documenting all information that allows you to record information and details of his behavior, his emotional status, emotional changes, his progress in school, his progress in academics, any sort of medical issue. Anytime the youth takes any sort of medication, that needs to be documented. And in general, day-to-day events. Why are you documenting day-to-day events? So you can see the progress of the youth. So you can see what accommodations might need to be put in place. So you can see if there's any sort of support services that need to be put in place for the youth. Here's an example of a documentation in a professional workforce. On March 5th, 2024, at approximately 10:15 a.m., an incident occurred at Little Stars Child Care Center, located at 123 Sunshine Avenue, Happy Town, Hampton. Notice they put the location. During outdoor playtime, 4-year-old Emily Watson tripped over a toy left in the playground, resulting in a fall that caused a minor abrasion on her right knee and a slight bump on her forehead. Staff member Susan Lee, who was supervising the children at the time, immediately attended to Emily, applying first aid to clean the abrasion and applying an ice pack to her forehead to reduce swelling. Note that in the documentation here, it documented the staff member and what the staff member did. They applied the abrasion. Emily was comforted and closely monitored for the next hour to ensure there were no signs of serious injury or distress. The incident was promptly reported to the Child Care Center director, who reviewed the circumstances of the incident and the response. The director then contacted Emily's parents to inform them of the incident, the care provided, and to suggest monitoring Emily for any signs of concussion due to the bump on her forehead. Note here that the documentation was also including not only the staff member, Susan Lee, but also the director, because the director was also involved. Please note here as well that there are no abbreviations here. There are no acronyms here. There are no emotions or personal biases here. No biases or opinions about the director or the child. It was just the facts. Also note the sentences were simple, clear, and concise. Here is another example of written documentation. I will not read this one for you. You can read this on your own time, but again, this is another example of proper documentation in the form of an incident report. Why is documentation important? Well, with proper documentation and records, you not only protect yourself from false accusations and allegations, because they could occur, you also help to protect the team. Let me say that again. When you write proper documentation, you help not only to help the teen, but to help protect yourself from any false accusations or allegations. Because there may be an accusation or allegation from the youth that you did something or said something or did not do something or say something. There might be an accusation from a fellow caseworker that you did not do something or that you said something. When you write proper documentation in a non-biased factional fashion and you do it promptly, again, this helps to protect yourself from any false accusations or allegations because written proper documentation can be seen as sort of evidence. It's a record, a written record of what transpired in a non-emotional, non-biased, non-opinion fashion, and just the facts. In addition, documentation provides very important information and insight, not only for your fellow caseworkers and staff members, but also for therapists and counselors, for courts, attorneys, judges, and for anybody who is advocating for that youth. If you have questions about writing documentation for your workplace, ask your supervisor what they would suggest when it comes to documentation, because your facility may have specific rules, specific documentation policies that you need to be aware of. If you're looking for some words of inspiration, working with youth can be challenging. The book, The Little Book of Foster Care Wisdom, 365 Days of Inspiration and Encouragement, might be the book that is for you. And we have several books here at the Foster Care Institute. For much more, check out our website, the Foster Care Institute, at Dr. John DeGarmo, fostercare.com. Follow me on Facebook and Twitter for much more regarding working with youth in the foster care system. And if you have questions about this, or perhaps you wish to set up a doctor in demand session with me, please email me at drjohndegarmo@gmail.com. I want to thank you not only for watching this webinar, the importance of documentation, I want to thank you for all that you do to help youth in crisis. You may feel you're not making a difference. I can assure you it's the opposite. You are changing the life and the world for a teenager that's in crisis. You are making a difference, and you inspire me. Thank you for all that you do. For the Foster Care Institute, I'm Dr. John DeGarmo.